on. Okay. So welcome. Today we're going to be learning about organizing successful conservation press events. This webinar, we're going to discuss the logistical side of press events, including, what to bring, who to invite, as well as how to reach out to reporters to encourage them to cover the event. So this webinar is being recorded, and a link to download it will be sent afterwards. And this webinar was organized in part thanks to the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed Communications Work Group. So if your organization is a member of the coalition and you would like to join our work group, you can send me a message in the chat box. My name on here is Rita Yelda. And the work group, essentially what we do is we come together to leverage collective communications assets to support common priorities and elevate the status of the Delaware River watershed. And we also provide training and materials like this webinar to help improve and expand coalition members' communications capacity. So if you're interested in joining the CDRW Communications Work Group, again, you could just send me a message in the chat box if you'd like to join. With that, I am going to pass it off to Hillary Mohawk, the Social Media Strategist and Inclusion Manager for Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania and New Jersey League of Conservation Voters.
Thanks, Rita. And before we jump into the webinar, I just wanted to give a quick introduction of the work that we do at Conservation Voters of PA and New Jersey LCV to support organizations in the Delaware River watershed. Both of our organizations are funded by the William Penn Foundation to help organizations like the ones you all work for to build your capacity to engage new and established constituencies. Our support there's a variety of ways that we do that to support organizations, including by promoting your events and programs, helping you to think critically about how you can promote your events and programs differently, providing social media content and support, and one-on-one consultations, and also leading trainings just like this one. Rita said that we would be, we are recording this, so if you're jumping in a little bit late, or if you have to get off early, or if you have some colleagues who want to make sure they get this information, the recording will be available to you soon after this webinar. And we are going to leave time for questions at the end. Generally with Zoom, we have found that it gets a little bit chaotic to have questions provided or offered verbally. So what we'd like to ask you all to do is to put the questions in the chat box, and you can do that throughout the webinar. So whenever the question comes up, for the most part, we'll address those questions at the end, though if there's a question for clarification, I'll be sure to flag that for Rita and Kate during the webinar as it's going. So put those questions in the chat box as we go, and we'll answer them at the end. So we are going to jump into the webinar now, and starting with Kate Layton from the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. She joined PDE in 2018 as the Marketing and Communications Manager. In this role, she is responsible for promoting PDE and all of its activities to build awareness and engagement for protecting and enhancing the Delaware Estuary. Before joining PDE, Kate served as the Public Outreach Manager for the Dover and Kent Counties Metropolitan Planning Organization in Central Delaware, and prior to that, she was a reporter and photographer for newspapers in Delaware, Indiana, and Kansas City. She is a native of Kansas, where she received a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Kansas, and now she lives in Central Delaware, and we're very happy to have her helping to lead the webinar today. So take it away, Kate.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar. So I'm going to talk about press events and the logistics of press events, your venue, speakers, when not to have a press event even, some suggestions for that. So first things first, think about if your information is press event material, because press events are work and it's like putting on a show. And so as such, they require some planning behind the scenes. Now, sometimes you may not get a whole lot of time if you're putting on a press event for things like an emergency or breaking news. And so you won't, some of your press events might be a little bit bare bones because of the time factor, but in these cases, before you put on this production, ask yourself if your information is the right a press event is the right platform for your information, because reporters are on tight timelines. We all know that. And so ask yourself if this is worth the media's time as well. And so sometimes there's just no substitute for the in-person relay of information. And so this is something when, you know, a press release, a media advisory, social media post, it's not going to suffice by itself. It's too big. And so you really just need a press event to deliver some of these pieces of information. There's also often a visual element, even if someone is just presenting information or answering questions, but there's usually a photo, video, soundbite, quote opportunity involved with this. And it's also a chance for you to get information out to several people at one time and also answer questions at one time. Oh, hi. So any kind of public announcement to provide information about something urgent, like an emergency or disaster, the presentation of a long-range plan, large grant award celebrations, groundbreaking ceremony or ribbon cutting, kick off an event when you have a first of something, new legislation signings or campaign announcements, and the signing of a significant agreement. So those are some criteria for holding a press event, but what you want to get out of your event is going to be a little bit different. And of course, it almost goes without saying, you want to get your story in the news. You want to get your information out there. So you want that article in the paper. You want that story on the evening news. You want that radio segment or that blog online. So of course, you know, it's to get press attention. You want to provide information and answer questions about an urgent matter. Maybe you want to get ahead of the situation instead of the story getting ahead of you. You know, again, you might have breaking news or an incident or emergency. We hope that never happens, but that could be a qualifying factor. You want to highlight the program or the work or the people that have been part of a major project that you're proud of. To explain the why and the how behind this particular topic or this particular project. You might want to recognize sponsors, donors, agencies, officials who help make something happen. You want to engage decision makers about a piece of legislation. Raise awareness about your agency. So again, so you have all those criteria in mind and you're still thinking, yep, still qualifies. So then you can start thinking about logistics. So you have a checklist of things, you know, maybe taking the time. You need to consider if you need a rain date, in case you have to postpone an event. You need, of course, a venue or a place, a backup venue in case of bad weather, where you can still hold your event without, you don't need to postpone it, but you just need to move it inside. Of course, you need people to speak at your event, and you need a podium, seats, sound system if you have that available, an agenda of the press event, who's speaking and when, press materials to hand out to members of the press. Food and drinks, that's discretionary because it could depend on your budget, depend on, you know, what your policies are about food and drinks at a public event. But maybe, you know, some water for your speakers. It's a good idea to have signs to show people that they've arrived at the right place, or to show that, you know, maybe it's on a building of a campus, so you need to kind of just show that, just drive a little farther ahead. And also it's a good idea to have maybe some kind of visuals, you know, a map, a poster, you know, unless you have a presentation, maybe a ribbon cutting, you want a ribbon and a big scissors, or maybe just a banner with the name of your agency or the campaign tagline. And so let's talk about the venue for a minute. If you have time to plan this, and your venue is not on your own premises, you're going to another site, do a site visit ahead of time to see what your space limitations are. And that way you can kind of set your stage and see what the acoustics are like, what the space limitations are, your lighting, how are you fixed for electrical outlets, how's the parking. And also think about the weather, what weather elements you might need to work around, like high tide. I mean, this is, you know, something that you have to think about in this area, humidity, cold weather. We actually had to postpone a press event this past September because of high tide. The weather was exacerbating high tide, and it was causing water to go across the road, and it was physically barring it was going to physically bar people from getting to the venue. So those things do need to be taken into consideration. And then also consider, you know, what things you might need to bring with you and what things might already be available on site, like easels, screens, electrical equipment like extension cords. Is there a wireless connection there, or are you going to have to bring a hotspot with you? How many people can your venue hold if it's indoors? Because that space limitation could affect how many people you could invite in addition to the press. And do you think that you'll need to bring or rent a canopy for people to stand under if it's really sunny, or if you don't have any place to move people indoors, but you know, it's sprinkling? And then does your press event include a demonstration or a facility tour? There was a press event that we had last year where our science director and someone from Drexel University went into the Delaware River and put mussels into the river. Let's talk about speakers. I'm talking about people speakers, not electrical speakers. So you might want a master of ceremonies, someone to kick things off. And that could be a director of your organization, a project manager, public relations person, someone from the host organization. And then who's your main speaker? Who's giving the core message? And again, that could be an executive director, a legislator, department head. Who do you want for supporting speakers, people to give additional information? And that said, you don't have to have everybody speak at your press event, because you don't want these things to go on for a long time. People's attention spans are short, they get antsy. So think about how many people you really want to speak, and then that can affect how long they can speak. Because each person should really only speak for a minute or two. And then also talk to your potential speakers about, as you're creating your agenda, to discuss their talking points, what they're addressing. Do they need help with writing talking points? Consider who else you might want to invite to be part of your press event, even if they don't speak, because that can be a gesture of goodwill. It can be good manners to invite them. And also that's an opportunity to have people in a photo opportunity, or to answer individual questions after the main presentation is done. And then think about the flow of your agenda, where you want to have a nice smooth flow where one speaker naturally segues into the next. So taking all those things into consideration, think about, well, you know, maybe it's not a press event. So an example of that, some examples could be, when a topic is somewhat routine, like it's, you know, the 6th year of your event and there's no major changes to it. And of course you can still invite press, but maybe it's not an occasion for a press event. On the other hand, if you are rebranding something about your event, rejudging it, then, you know, maybe that, in that case, that is occasion for a press event. Or when the victory is small, like you have a really small grant. You know, any kind of a grant is good, of course, for your program, but sometimes a press release or a media advisory can just take care of that. On the other hand, say yes, your grant or your donation came solely from the proceeds of a kid's lemonade stand, and you could have a presentation for that where, you know, kids are bringing up their nickels to donate to the organization. That would be a press event. So just consider the context. Or maybe, you know, there's no real visual element, no need for an in-person public statement, there's no action to witness. You know, that's where you have to consider, you know, maybe it's not a press event. And also just generally when the news hook just isn't big enough to draw media. And Rita, of course, is going to talk about that in a minute. And then finally, things happen. And so what you do is you just keep your cool. You just fall back on your planning and keep your cool and just keep on going. Do your best. And with that, that concludes my portion.
Great. Thank you, Kate. That's awesome. So I'm going to take over now. Let me share my screen here. Okay, great. So again, if you have any questions during any of this, feel free to type them in the chat box. We'll save a bunch of time at the end for Q&A as well. So I'm Rita Yelda. I am the Outreach and Communications Manager for the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. Today, I want to talk to you about getting the press to your event and some of the documents and collateral that's associated with that. So first, let's chat about, will the media attend? So let's say that you went through all of the planning, the logistical planning that Kate just mentioned, and now you're thinking about, you know, how can I get the media there? Well, first, I think it really, you know, getting that media attention is one of the key objectives for holding a press event. It's assumed that, you know, if a reporter attends your event, you'll see your story on TV, you'll hear it on the radio, or you'll read it in a newspaper. And depending on your goals for the press event, you know, press coverage can help you reach new publics with your message. It can put pressure on decision makers and highlight the work of you and your allies. And like I said, the biggest factor that determines whether a reporter comes to your event is the subject matter. You really need to ask yourself, is my event press-worthy? So there's 8 big categories, and I'm sure that there's more, but there's 8 big categories that I really focus on when I'm talking about what makes press. The first is conflict. So that's pretty straightforward. That would be like a conflict between a community group and maybe a manufacturing plant, or maybe, you know, your organization and, I don't know, some other group. So conflict makes news. I think we see a lot of that in the news. Prominence also makes news. So that could be, you know, maybe your event is highlighting an on-the-ground conservation project located at George Washington's old house or something like that. You know, something that has prominence, big significance. Impact is another thing that helps give you that press hook, that makes press. So for example, maybe your organization is working on a restoration project that will improve the water of 1.5 million people. So that shows that there's a really big impact. Timeliness is another potential press hook. So that would be something like, you know, if there's only 30 days left to submit comments during a comment period for the EPA or for DEP or whatever. Exception is another example. So your press event might highlight a report that states, you know, Trenton residents value the river more than other communities. So I don't know that that's true, but when there is an exception, something that's kind of out of the norm, a little bit different, that can definitely be a great press hook as well. Firsts make press, so obviously the first time something big happens. Trends also make press. So for example, New Jersey reaching 50 municipalities that passed anti-plastic legislation. And then experts or prominent figures also help to bring legitimacy and get the press to report on your topic. So that includes scientists, legislators, and so on. So if you have some of these prominent folks at your event that are speaking or taking part of it, or even if it's a report that came from, a specific, academy or specific scientist, that is also something that can make press and be a good press hook. So sometimes it happens where a reporter will attend your event, but then not report on it. You won't hear it or see it anywhere. And it's a bummer, but it definitely happens. And then sometimes you'll put together a press event and then no reporters will attend at all. Don't fret. Think about the other means that you have for reaching members of the public. Utilize things like blogs, emails, social media to get your news out. Ask allied organizations to help spread the word on their social media to get more eyes on your news. If you know reporters aren't going to attend your event, you might even want to consider doing a Facebook live stream or Instagram live stream so that your audience can see what you have going on. So use the audiences that you're already in touch with to spread your news. All right, so these three, media pitches, media advisories, and press releases, these are all examples of communication that is sent to or shared with reporters. These three documents are sent at different times and have different purposes. So a media pitch is almost like a short outline of an idea for a story that you want a reporter to know about, and maybe do some more in-depth speaking with you to pitch them on that idea, which I'll talk a little bit more about media pitches in a second. But it's more so an outline of an idea that's sent through an email. A media advisory is an invitation to reporters to attend an in-person event or a telephone press conference. So a media advisory, again, that's an invitation. So you have an event that is about to happen, you want the press to know about it. Sorry, can somebody, I'm hearing some background noise. Can you put yourself on mute? And then a press release comes out after a press event happens and reports on everything that occurred. They come out typically after the press event happens, but they're usually written in advance of the event, assuming that we know what's going to happen at the event. So let's pick apart these three documents. Okay, so this is the anatomy of a media pitch. So a media pitch is typically done through email. It begins by connecting your story idea to previous work the reporter has done. It shows them that you've done your research and you're not just spamming every reporter you can find. A pitch is, 2 to 3 paragraphs long. It should have a catchy subject line. It should come from a real person. And in the media pitch, you want to explain how your issue will impact the communities that the reporter writes for. So for example, don't write the Philly Inquirer about, with a pitch about New York's drinking water. They will not care. Making the messaging as local as possible is important. Name the specific state, counties, and cities within their readership that will be impacted by the information you're sharing. Be sure to also convey what's at stake. Avoid jargon, avoid too many acronyms, and make sure that the pitch is timely. Reporters want to know about what's happening now, not what happened 6 months ago. So in your media pitch, you're also going to ask for a time to speak with the reporter, either in person or over the phone, more likely, to share your story idea with them. All right, let's talk about a media advisory. This is an actual example of a media advisory that I wrote and I used last month. And a media advisory acts as an event invitation for reporters, and it's sent before an event. I like to email out, I like to email out the media advisory like maybe 1 or 2 weeks in advance of the event to reporters. Then I do a follow-up call to reporters about a week out. And then I usually resend the media advisory the day before the event or the morning of the event, just to let folks know that it's happening now, today, this day. And if you're inviting TV news to your event, just keep in mind that they will always tell you that they don't know if they can attend until the day of. So I wouldn't rely on them as much, but typically, radio and print and maybe even blogs might come out to your event, and you want to make sure that you're sending out this media advisory as an invitation. And when you're doing your follow-up calls after you send the media advisory, be ready to pitch why your event is important or interesting, and be sure to ask if the reporter can attend, and if they can't attend, if they'd like a copy of the press release. Sometimes even if the reporter cannot attend your event, they will report on your event based on the press release. So it's important to have a nice solid press release, which I will talk about on the next slide. For the media advisory, there's many samples online of different formats, different ways for this to flow. I typically follow, but they all kind of typically follow this who, what, where, when, why format. And I typically follow this format that's on the right, where I have the header, subheader, that kind of thing. A media advisory should really be short and succinct, no longer than one page, and it should give the reporter everything they need to know about the press event. That could include the rain location, like Kate mentioned, suggestions on shoes or clothing to wear if the event is outdoors in nature. I have had events where I've asked reporters to wear long sleeves and long pants because they may be exposed to poison ivy, to wear boots to get ready for their feet to potentially be muddy, that sort of thing. And you can even see on this that we told people it's rain or shine, wear boots, dress warmly, bring an umbrella. My one pro tip for media advisories is if you are putting together a gala or a conference or something that goes on for many hours during the day, I would not, I would not put the entire length of the event. I would instead put, maybe an hour or a couple hours where the reporters can come and see something of significance at your event. So you might want the reporter to come to your conference or your gala when your keynote speaker is about to take the stage, or when your executive director is going to be out of a session and available for comment. If you put the entire length of the event on your media advisory, if it's a gala or a press conference or something, like I said, that's all day, it really makes it challenging to greet the reporters when they arrive, and they might wander around aimlessly, unsure of who to talk to or who to interview. And unfortunately, I've had that happen, and lesson learned. So make sure that you are giving reporters a specific window of when they should come if it is a very long event. And you also want to make sure that your media advisory gives necessary background. You can link to more sources for information. So you can see that the underlined portion in blue, that is a hyperlink. So anywhere that you're talking about something that maybe sounds a little bit more insider, more jargony, more industry specific, you can hyperlink that to more information. But try to not make this media advisory longer than a page. The hyperlinks will help you with that. And the same thing goes with the media pitch. Same thing as with the media pitch. You want to make sure that your messaging is local. Name local municipalities. Name how many people are going to be impacted. The email, so this media advisory email should also come from a real person. Again, the information should be timely. Avoid jargon as much as possible. And I typically, for the subject line, when I send this in an email, you want to copy and paste it into an email. Don't put it on as an attachment, because people will think it's a virus and probably not open it. So usually in the subject line, I'll write media advisory and then the topic in the subject line of the email. Okay, so this is a press release. Again, this is an actual press release that I had from last month. The actual press release was 2 pages, so I kind of just shrunk it down for the sake of this webinar. But a press release is sent after the event, so that even if a reporter didn't attend, they have everything they need to write about the event. As Kate mentioned earlier, you also want to have print copies of the press release with you to take to your press event. So essentially, this press release is, like I said, everything that happened at the event, all the information they need to know. Everything that they need to write a story should be in this. including quotes, background information, all of that good stuff. So you want to have at the top, very similar to the media advisory, that date and contact info. I like to have my header and subheader. I also like to have a link to a press kit that will include photos that I took from the event, maps of, if it's a conservation project, maybe map of the conservation project, maybe before and after photos, any videos, anything like that. You can have a link right at the top. And again, this is, photos that the media might use if they weren't at the event. If they were at the event, they probably are going to use their own pictures that they took. But any additional information, you can have a link to that right at the top of your press release. I just wanted to note that you should be putting the location of the event in bold at the start of the first paragraph, just standard industry practice. And you want to make sure, like I said, that you have that background, but you also want to have quotes from some of the people who are speaking at the event and potentially some other stakeholders. The quotes don't have to be all from speakers at the event, but it's very helpful because those are, if that's the people that you want speaking at the event that has the key messages you want to share with the public, it'd be worth probably having a quote from them as well. I would say that a press release should be 2 pages at the most. I would avoid anything longer, and I would try to keep it a page. If you can do a page or a page and a half, the fact of the matter is that it's just, the reporter will not read it if it is very, very long. So I have 2 pro tips for writing press releases. The first one is to write them kind of like an inverted triangle with the most important information towards the top, and then leading all the way down to the least important information at the end. That's because most reporters won't read all the way till the end. And the first paragraph should really summarize your event well enough that a reporter, if they just read that first paragraph, they kind of know everything that's going on. My second pro tip is to write the press release like a news article. So that means everything that's not in quotes should be factual and without opinion. So save statements like, the Delaware River watershed has the best water in the United States, for a quote, because while I believe that is true, it may not actually be a fact. So you want to save those kind of opinion-y, taking a stand, supporting an issue kind of quotes, or that kind of information. You want to keep that in quotes, and just make sure that everything that's in the paragraph area is just factual information, again, without opinion. Ideally, a reporter will like your press release well enough that they publish it almost verbatim, and that's because you want the story to be told on your terms as opposed to them perhaps missing the main point. I've had reporters publish my press releases as their own writing in the past, and I love it. It's actually my ultimate goal because it means that they didn't misconstrue the purpose of the press release or of the event, and they're using all of my talking points. Just remember that reporters want to know how their readers, how their viewers, how their listeners are going to be impacted. So make sure you're writing with a local angle. I can't stress that enough for all of these documents. So that might mean instead of doing a multi-state press release, maybe writing one for each state that provides local flavor, mentions local municipalities, local outcomes, and that kind of thing. Okay, so this is a sample press event planning timeline. It's just a suggestion on how you might want to space out your work in the order of planning. It's just a sample. There's other ways of doing it. And sometimes you might not have 6 weeks to put together a press event. However, I like to start out with week 1, choosing the location, the rain location, the date, the messaging, purpose, goals, and all of the logistical needs that Kate talked about earlier, signage and what have you. My second week, I like to talk about, I like to figure out, who are my speakers going to be? Who are the best people to convey this message? Is there somebody who's been essential in this project that if we don't invite them to speak, they may get a little grumpy? I also like to figure out who should we invite to attend, but maybe not have speak. And then I start to develop a press list for the area where I am going to have the event. So one thing that I just wanted to mention is for the developing a press list, this is especially important if you're doing an event in a new area or aren't familiar with reporters who report on the type of topic that your organization works on. So you can develop your press list by finding press contacts, looking at newspapers in your area, seeing who reports on environmental issues, on the kind of issues that you care about or that your organization is working on. You can also go online, find out the email addresses for the newsroom for TV stations. There's typically, one email for a newsroom for TV stations, but newspapers, you definitely want to reach out to the person who does reporting on environmental topics. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research on figuring out who that is. And same thing with radio stations. You want to figure out, which radio stations have news programming, what are their email addresses, do they have reporters that specifically report on environmental issues. So really looking through websites of media outlets and collecting contact information is how you're going to develop your press list. Okay, so just to jump back, so for week 3, that's when I'm typically writing the media advisory and press release. I'm getting quotes approved for the press release because, again, we want to have that ready to go as soon as the press conference is over. Week 4, I like to send out the media advisory to the press. If you had a hard time finding a reporter's email address, you might want to tweet at them. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to find some of these reporters on Twitter. So you might want to tweet your media advisory at them, maybe even send them a private message and reach out to them. And then week 4 is also when I'm doing my pitch calls. So those are the follow-up calls to the media advisory. And I'm using my press list to do those pitch calls. So in your press list, you should have phone numbers and you should have email addresses and names of people to contact at the varying media outlets that you want to attend. Week 5, I'm usually resending the media advisory, confirming with speakers, making sure they have their talking points, confirming with any press who may have RSVP'd the week prior when I was doing the pitch calls and sending the media advisory. And then week 6, I'm going to hold the press event. I'm going to make sure I take photos, upload that to my press kit, send the press release right after the event or right when the event starts so it gets out there as soon as possible. My one big caveat, so in week 1, I have choosing a date. My one big caveat to that is that if you want legislators to speak at your event, you should probably reach out to them in week 1 before you start planning some of these other things. Oftentimes, especially if you want a member of Congress to come, you have to give them deference to choose a date that works for them. Their schedules are just so demanding and all over the place that you could schedule a press event for January 1st, but if you're really banking on having a member of Congress speak, that date is probably going to get shifted a couple of times. Okay. So you just had a wonderful press event. Reporter wrote up a great article, gave you some great press coverage, and most of this news coverage ends up having a digital presence. So be sure to find the internet link to any coverage that you receive. Newspapers track which web pages on their website get the most visits. So you'll want to share the heck out of your news coverage to push people to visit the web page. The more people visiting the web page and the better that news coverage performs, means that reporter, that newspaper, is more likely to cover those types of events in the future. So after your event, send a thank you email to the reporter. Let them know you'll be promoting their article in your social media, on newsletters, etc. That'll let them know that you're driving traffic to their article. The reporter will appreciate you driving traffic to that web page, and it will also make their writing shine with their editor. So again, that they're more likely to cover your events in the future. And that is all I've got. Alrighty.
Thanks, Rita and Kate. So just as a reminder, if you have questions, which we're going to open it up to questions in just a second, put them in the chat box. and then I'll read them off to Kate and Rita to help moderate. So I'll give you all a moment to compose your questions in the chat box. I do have one question to start us off, which is Kate talked about, having to be, flexible in case something goes wrong. And Rita, you talked about, what if nobody attends your press event, things that you can do. Can you talk, I'm wondering if you both could talk just a little bit about other tips you have for like, these last minute changes or minor catastrophes, and how you, like in your experience, how you've like made lemonade from lemons to make it still a successful press event.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it is just being really, really prepared, and just knowing that even if you're doing a press conference outside in the middle of June, it might still rain. Being prepared with a backup location or multiple pop-up tents, writing in your media advisory to be prepared for the weather, inclement weather. Another thing that's really been helpful for me in the past is having people RSVP to attend the event, especially if you're inviting a lot of partners and allied organizations, and having an email list or even a phone list of all of the people who are going to attend. That way, if there is a last minute change, you can reach out to all of those people and let them know. I mean, I think that's the best thing, is just being able to communicate with all of the people so that, if your event ends up getting rained out, you know who to inform of that. So just knowing who's going to come to your event. And it's really easy to do if you're promoting your event more publicly. Just have like a Google form or a sign-up page or something like that. Or even just keep a text document of everybody who RSVPs with you. But I think that that's really helpful for last-minute changes. Do you have anything in addition, Kate?
If somebody has talking points, maybe if you could get their talking points in advance, if somebody isn't able to show up, see if there's someone else who could maybe relay some of the information in their place, if it's really important information to have. But I would say, just kind of, be able to think on your feet and, just kind of try to fall back on the agenda and see, where you can, take out or add things in at the last minute.
Cool, thank you. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions in the chat box. It doesn't look like there are. I'll give folks just another minute in case they want to add in a question.
I have one other thing that I wanted to mention too.
Sure, yeah.
And this kind of builds on what Kate said earlier about, having a podium and visuals and things like that. I think that when you're thinking about, visuals, sometimes it is helpful to have a sign for the front of your podium. Sometimes it's helpful to have people, standing behind the podium as somebody is speaking, holding up signs. Just really think visually, right? Because you're going to have TV news there, or you're going to have a photographer there from a newspaper. What are they going to be able to capture? What can they see and look at? What's really visual there? So if you're not doing some kind of awesome presentation where you're, putting oysters into the Delaware, what do you have that's really visual? And sometimes it means just printing out some really big visuals, or creating a nice visual, a nice kind of setup for the reporters to take in and record.
Cool, thanks. Steve has a question, and it is, can you talk a little bit about best practices for pitch follow-ups?
Sure. Let me go back to the media pitch. So this is essentially, like I said, the pitch is just kind of a general idea or a potential story. It's not an entire event that you're inviting them to. It's kind of like, we have this thing, we think that this could be like an important human interest story, or this impacts a lot of people. And really just reaching out to them, making it personal, sending them an email and then maybe following up with a call a few days later. Oftentimes reporters will let you know if they're not interested in your pitch. They'll tell you, that this is too vague, or it's the wrong readership for the subject, or what have you. So usually if you can get a hold of them, they are pretty honest about what they are looking for. But I find that if you have something like this that really builds on what they've already reported on and you connect it to their previous work, they're pretty receptive. Like I said, you want to show that you've done your research. You're not just spamming an entire list of, environmental reporters, but that you've read some of their stuff. You see that they have shown interest in this kind of subject area in the past, and you really individualize it. And I think that helps to show that personal connection, and it will get them to respond to you, even if the response is, I'm not interested.
Thanks. Someone asked, should you always send personal pitches, or are there times when it is appropriate to send to the full press list via BCC?
So I will typically do that with the media advisory. If I know that there's reporters that report on like the kind of issue that I am interested in, sometimes if I don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, I will do the BCC thing and send out the media advisory. I think the pitches need to be personalized. That's just kind of the nature of the media pitch. But the media advisory is a little bit more broad. Again, it's just an invitation. So sometimes I do like BCC, especially for the media advisory. And then if there's anybody that's responsive to the media advisory, I will send them the press release personally.
Cool, thank you. I'll just leave a couple more seconds for folks to add in a question if they have it. Kate, did you have anything else you wanted to add in addition?
I don't think so, unless somebody had a specific question.
All right, it looks like there are no additional questions in the chat box. I bet Rita and Kate would both welcome questions afterwards if folks have them after the webinar is over. And as Rita mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, Rita will be sending out a recording of this webinar. So thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.